Welcome back to Cinema Through the Ages, my series where I rank the 5 most iconic movies from each decade according to ChatGPT. This is all part of my mission to explore cinema history one decade at a time. This time, we're moving into the 1930s, a decade that many consider the start of Hollywood's golden age. Sound was now the norm, color technology was advancing, and the industry was producing some of the most influential films of all time. Meanwhile, audiences were looking for escapism as the Great Depression and rising political tensions shaped the world. I've watched 5 of the most iconic films from this era, and I'll be ranking them based on 4 key factors: how much I enjoyed the film, cultural influence, impact on cinema, and whether it has aged well. So let's get into the rankings, starting with number 5. At number 5, we have Gone with the Wind. Of all the films I watched from this era, Gone with the Wind was by far the grandest. A sweeping, decade-spanning epic with massive sets, elaborate costumes, and a larger-than-life story. It was a huge deal at the time, proving that big-budget colour films could be massively profitable. So much so that when adjusted for inflation, it's still the highest grossing movie of all time. But here's the thing, I didn't enjoy it at all. It's 4 hours long and was such a struggle to get through, I had to watch it in 3 separate sittings. But more than that, the film's glorification of the Old South and its deeply problematic portrayal of slavery have aged terribly. It paints a version of history that simply isn't accurate, and for that reason, it lands at the bottom of my ranking. Coming in at number 4 is Frankenstein. Now this one, I did enjoy. Frankenstein is a horror classic and was hugely influential in shaping the genre. It gave us the iconic mad scientist trope and one of the most legendary monster performances ever. Even if you've never seen the movie, you know the scene.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That moment is still referenced in pop culture today. The film's gothic imagery is incredible, and Frankenstein's monster remains one of the most recognizable figures in horror history. The reason it's not ranked higher is that in terms of influence, I feel like earlier films like Nosferatu had an even bigger impact on shaping horror as a genre. Still, there's no denying how iconic Frankenstein is. At number 3, we have M, which is a German crime thriller directed by Fritz Lang, and it's easily one of the most haunting films of the decade. It follows a city gripped by fear as a child murderer is on the loose, and it was way ahead of its time in how it built tension. The use of sound was revolutionary. This was one of the first films to use a recurring musical motif to signal the presence of a killer, something that would go on to become a staple in horror and thriller films. It also helped shape the detective and crime genres as we know them today. The cinematography, the psychological depth, it all still holds up remarkably well, making M one of the most impressive films of the 1930s. Taking the runner-up spot at number 2 is The Wizard of Oz. We all know The Wizard of Oz, but watching it in the context of 1930s cinema really made me appreciate how groundbreaking it was. The transition from black and white Kansas to the vibrant Technicolor world of Oz, that must have been mind-blowing for audiences back then. This film played a massive role in advancing the use of colour in cinema, and even today, it remains one of the most beloved films ever made. It's been referenced and adapted countless times, from The Wiz to Wicked, and it gave us some of the most quoted lines in film history.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
This is still a line that's used regularly today. At number 1, I have to go with Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. This was the first ever full-length animated feature, and if it had failed, animation as we know it today might not even exist. Disney took a huge risk making this, but it paid off in a massive way, proving that animated films could be as impactful as live-action ones. Even 100 years later, Snow White is still watched by kids all over the world. That's the definition of iconic. And that's my ranking of the most iconic films from the 1930s. Do you agree with my list, or would you have ranked these differently? Let me know in the comments. And keep a lookout for the next part of my Cinema Through the Ages series, where I'll be moving on to the 1940s. Trust me, this decade has some absolute classics, so you won't want to miss it.